Hi, I'm Trevor Hancock and I'm a retired professor of public health and I live in Victoria, BC. Now, a few months ago, I was walking in these woods, which are about 15 minutes drive from my home, among some of the largest Douglas fir trees on the island, and thinking about the power and beauty of nature and my connections with it. And I sat there and wrote what became a column, one of the weekly columns I write for the Times columnist here, about connections. And Susan Prescott saw that article and asked me to do this piece based on that article. So this is what I want to talk about: the importance of making connections and gaining perspective as keys to both personal and planetary well-being. So here's a little story, true story, that in 1994 there was an earthquake which knocked out power in LA, and many people were phoning the emergency services anxious and concerned, maybe even frightened, because they were seeing this strange giant silvery cloud in the dark sky. Well, this is what they were seeing. For the first time in their lives, they were seeing the Milky Way. And I think that's actually very sad. And it's because across the world, and particularly, as you can see here, in Europe and North America, but in many other parts, Japan and so on, 2/3 of the US population and more than half of the European population can't see the Milky Way because of the amount of brightness in the night sky. And so my question as I think about this has always been, if we can't see the stars at night, how do we know our place in the universe? So this is one of the connections that we have lost, and re-establishing these connections, I think, is going to be central to our managing to become a sustainable, just and healthy society. Here's another way to make that connection. So every culture has someone a bit like, or something a bit like Gaia. Gaia was, for the ancient Greeks, the goddess of the earth, the great mother of all creation. And of course, as I say, many cultures have an equivalent, whether it's Pachamama or Erde. If you've ever seen Wagner's Ring, you will know that Erde is one of the gods in Wagner's Ring, in La Terre, and in many other languages, Te Wanoa in Maori. And so this is Gaia, the Earth Mother. But that is a very ancient concept. And if you look at indigenous worldviews, and this comes from the Indigenous Peoples Statement for Planetary Health and Sustainable Development that was developed as part of the IUHP World Conference on Health Promotion 18 months ago in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, that this was part of that statement, that with respect to Indigenous worldviews, core features include the interactive relationship between the material and spiritual realms, the intergenerational relationships and the collective orientations, the notion that Mother Earth is a living being, and we are part of Mother Earth's ecosystems alongside our relations in the natural world. That, interestingly enough, is also what science tells us. So this is James Lovelock's Gaia theory, that the Earth is a self-regulating system able to keep the climate and chemical composition comfortable for organisms. The notion of the Earth as a living thing. And 30 years later, in 2001, you have the Amsterdam Declaration on Earth System Science. The Earth system behaves as a single self-regulating system comprised of physical, chemical, biological, and human components. We are part of the Earth system. This is another important connection that goes back to indigenous ways of knowing and very ancient ways of knowing, but is also very science-based. Let me switch gears a little bit and ask how many of you have houseplants? And I would be willing to bet that at least 2/3 of you would have put your hands up. And my question then is why? Why would you have houseplants? Could it be an expression of what E.O. Wilson called biophilia, the connections that human beings subconsciously seek with the rest of life? I think that's exactly why we have houseplants, why we have house pets for that matter. We evolved, he tells us, he reminds us, in natural environments. And so we may have an innate need for nature. And this is another set of connections that relates to all of those living things. So I share 99.9% of my DNA with every other human being on Earth. So we are only separate by 1 part in 1,000, or different, I should say. So we're really not separate at all. We're very connected. And so the notion of racism becomes quite absurd in the face of such things. But also, I share 99% of my DNA with chimps and bonobos, 98% with gorillas, 84% with dogs, 60% with the chickens we eat and with fruit flies, even 26% with yeast and 15% with mustard grass. And so you have to understand how very connected we all are to humanity and to all life on Earth. And the notion that we are somehow individual and separate and apart from nature and apart from even each other, that we don't live in a collective social way, is absurd and also not true to the science. Another way to think about our connections that take us back millennia, millions of years in fact, is that every time we breathe and eat and drink, we're breathing atoms or eating or drinking atoms that the people millennia before us, and in fact the dinosaurs and who knows, also breathed, also ate. In fact, in some ways we're eating their bodies, a notion, or the atoms that were part of their bodies anyway. Something that was brought home to me when I was in East Africa and standing on the savannah, and I could see skulls and skeletons here and there, and I suddenly realized the earth I was on was actually the recycled, repurposed atoms and molecules, substance of all the millions of animals and plants over all the millions of years that had been there. It was a very profound sense of connection. So we're deeply connected and entirely dependent upon the great web of life, which sustains us in so many ways. But we're also connected to each other. And this, of course, is the very famous view of the world from 9th Avenue, the cartoon, the front page of the New Yorker in 1976 by Saul Steinberg. That notion that, you know, we know what's here, but we have much less clear notions of what's further away, and that what really matters is what's here. Here is where it matters. So neighborhood and community and the connections we have to place and to each other in the places where we live and work and play are also very important. And the science again tells us that. And then this, which I think of as the ultimate connection that I've always kind of reveled in, the notion that all of our atoms were actually have a common origin, and that common origin is that we're all star stuff, that those atoms of which we are composed were forged in the heart of collapsing and exploding stars, and not just us, but all the materials of the Earth, the solar system and beyond. We have this common origin. So when I die, I just go back to being star stuff, and I think it's a lovely idea. So in thinking about all of this, and also in terms of its connections both to people and to nature, I thought first of all of this 1946 confession of German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller. First, he said, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. It's a very famous confession. Well, I thought about that and worked on it, and I created a new version of this, which I call First They Came for the Whales, a Lament. First, they came for the whales and the sharks, the salmon and the cod, and I did not speak out because they were but sea creatures. Then they came for the elephants and the tigers, the rhinos and the bears, and I did not speak out because they were only animals. Then they came for the birds and the insects, the reptiles and the frogs, and I did not speak out because they were small and unimportant. Then they came for the trees and the grasslands, the ferns and mosses, and I did not speak out because they are just plants. Then they came for me, because we had so damaged the great web of life that everything I did depend upon for life was gone. So in contemplating this, I'd like you to think about the importance of connection, the importance of getting this much larger perspective on life, on nature, on the cosmos, but also on community and on each other. We have to re-establish connections to nature, to each other, and these are some of the most important things we can do if we're going to become a just, sustainable, and healthy society. This is another way that I make my connections. I participate every year in a festival called Jack in the Green in Hastings, and that's me, top left. I'm a green man, and this festival is 2 days, 3 days of eating, drinking, singing, dancing, parading, drumming, and it's thousands of people, many of them dressed in some aspect of green. It's obviously about a connection to nature, to this ancient image of the green man, but it's not a political demonstration. It's not about politics. There are no slogans, no posters, no banners, no speeches. It's just a celebration. And I think we have to find ways to make these connections to each other and these connections to nature that are rooted in emotion, in feeling, in spirituality, and not simply in rationality and science. And so I suggest we need to find ways to do much more of this in the years to come. So thank you for your attention, and please do make connections.